and keeping us all connected during COVID. It's super helpful and gives us all something to look forward to. Just something real quick on LiveIntent for those who haven't heard me say it probably 10 times. At LiveIntent, we brought together the best advertising technology with the world's most powerful marketing engine, which is email. So we've created the largest logged in media channel outside of Facebook, Google, and Amazon in North America. So for small and large brands like Wayfair, Simply Safe, Thrive Cosmetics, Domino's, we make it possible for them to reach 290 million real people in North America as they consume email content. Now, this email content sent out by over 2,500 publishing brands like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Fanatics, Meredith, Condé Nast, the list goes on, every major holding company in the US. And since every ad is only ever served, when an email is opened and images are turned on, we can verify that every impression is targeted and optimized to a real human being. So enough on LiveIntent. You guys are here to listen to Antony. I'm excited for our discussion today. And Antony, let's start with a little bit of an icebreaker. If you could rent an RV and travel anywhere to throughout the US right now, where would you go and why?
Great question. And maybe I should start a little bit differently rather than just dive in, maybe give a little bit of background because I think your question is very relevant to my background. So, all right. Well, firstly, great to meet everybody, even virtually. Thanks for having me on this summit. And talking about my background because I come from Europe. So I've lived in small countries. One of them is Cyprus. That's where I grew up, and it was a very you can go from end to end in it's like 120 miles. And my recent stint was living in Luxembourg, which is an even smaller country. I mean, you can go across the country within 2 hours of driving. So it's we're talking about very small territories. So moving to the US is obviously, although I've traveled here many times, but living here is the first time. So where am I going with this? And going back to your question, Jason, if I was in an RV, obviously I wouldn't be in a very small place because I've had too many of those. So maybe my trip would be Highway 66. It's a little bit of a kind of a historical trail and a little bit of a thing for a lot of Europeans, not having lived in the States. So, just thinking of a road that starts from, one part of the country and goes all the way to the other end, 2,500 miles of it, and all the historical landmarks that you see, you visit. I mean, this is stuff of the movies for us. It's not something that I've experienced. So it's that would definitely be the one I would go with.
That's a great choice. I've had the pleasure of, I think, driving through almost, I'd say about 38 of the states, and I recommend it highly. So, not just one road trip, but maybe a couple while you're here. So thank you for that. So let's first off start by a little bit more information around your role, what you're responsible for, what you care about.
Sure. So my title, I'll start with that, and then I can break that down a little bit. So, I'm head of consumer retention for McAfee. So Sachin gave a great kind of debrief of what McAfee is all about. And just to add to that, we're, for us who know the company, there's two main lines of business, I would call them. It's the B2C and the B2B, or what we just casually talk about, it's consumer and enterprise. So both myself and Sachin, we both work for the consumer business. And basically, my role in this context, it basically starts once a customer is acquired and becomes a paid subscriber, the move to retention. So the effort for me and my team from that point on is building a relationship with them to keep them loyal to McAfee. So maybe put it into perspective, what you heard from Sachin, he and his team are responsible for growing the top of the funnel for us. And my team's job is how do we retain those customers? How do we grow lifetime value?
And do you also do the win back, or is that a different group? Like in terms of winning back dormant customers or people that maybe left the brand?
Yeah, so again, so win back is very much part of my team's remit, but obviously working with Sachin because some of these customers would be long gone, the ones who are more kind of earlier into their expiry flow. We have a closer affinity to them as a retention team, but then once you start going to the 6 and the 8 and the 12 months lost, then becomes, again, it goes back into more of an acquisition journey. And that's where Sachin and his team do their magic to kind of figure out how we can get them back into the fold.
That's really smart. Now, a lot of our conversation today is going to be based on, really focused on personalization. So my first question is to you, what does personalization mean to you specifically?
Personalized. Well, I'll tell you about it in the context of my job as well. So more specifically around that. But the way I look at it, it's personalization. It's the catalyst for any brand that's obsessed with its customers. So, I'm probably kind of speaking to the singing to the choir here, but what it is to us, it's the way, personalization is the way a brand provides an experience that's tailored to the customer's preferences and to the specific needs. So the way I look at it, that experience needs to be end-to-end. In other words, it needs to live in the product. It needs to live across, messaging channels. It's in the offers that a customer gets. And basically every touch point a brand has with the customer. So it's beyond marketing. It's everything. So, and the key takeaway here for me is, personalization is centered around, ideally, how well you know your customer. And the experience needs to be tailored around that knowledge.
That's smart. Before I go further, I just noticed, like, I'm seeing my image. I'm wearing glasses that turn dark when I'm outside, so I'm not being unfriendly. It's just the only pair of glasses I have, everyone. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm some, cool rock star. Anyway, moving on. When you're thinking about personalization, who's doing it right? Like, when you just think during COVID, during this period of time, 9 months or so, however long we've been doing this, what brands are doing it right during this time?
Yeah. So I'll tell you my experiences. So, if I look at across the spectrum, if I think of companies, more and more are getting better with personalization. The ones that I can, come to my mind is obviously the likes, Amazon, Spotify, Netflix. And Netflix, I don't think they've done, or maybe they have, but, they haven't done anything specific during COVID. But during COVID, I became more connected to them because you spend a little bit more time at home. You kind of rediscover, content, titles that you had, you wanted to watch, you didn't. So it's kind of get me with Netflix. And I think that this company has done it really well. They've invested in personalizing the experience. And, for people like me that subscribe to them, you see it's in the product, it's in their content, it's in their messaging. They've kind of taken it end to end. And what I like about them specifically is they do a good job in using predictive algorithms, AI, and they make these recommendations which just kind of, reading about how they do it. They take into account behavioral data. So, for example, they take your viewing history, how you've rated titles. They take your own viewing behavior. So things like, your viewing preferences by time of day, which is quite smart. You may like to watch something romantic in the evening, something more action driven during the day. So they kind of take all that into account. They look at what devices you're using at what time of the day. And they also mix in viewing choices of other customers, which have the same, same kind of tastes and preferences like you do, which, overall, if I look at it as a user, I feel that it works pretty well. So, it goes to tell me how much they've invested in knowing the customer and, making sure that they provide an experience that best meets their individual needs.
That's, the one thing I think that where they could take it to the next level in terms of Netflix is moving beyond the screen, like, moving potentially, whether it's into text or into email and making recommendations or curating a list of movies to watch or TV shows to watch based on your habits and things like that. So they are one of the best examples, but even they, I think, there's room for improvement. I'd say the company that I talk about is Fresh Direct. During COVID, everyone started moving over to delivery, and we had been using Fresh Direct for years, and I gotta say, they didn't miss a single delivery. We got food delivered every single week, and then on top of it, they used email and to tell us when something couldn't be shipped and actually offered up alternatives. That to me was really important, because you can't get more personal than the food that you consume and how important that is when you've got a family at home depending on it, and you can't go outside and go shopping very easily.
It's amazing. I mean, it's a great story, and it's a great story, because obviously they do a great job in personalizing and reaching out to the customer, but also how did they manage within the the hype of the pandemic to kind of pivot their offering, their proposition, and do what you've described. I'll give you a little bit of an example on our end as well. So we call ourselves customer obsessed. We desire to become customer obsessed. We're not there yet. We have all the right intentions. We have all the right motions. We are going to get there. But one of the things that we did, and again, just responding to COVID, just making, it was part of a plan, but we accelerated that plan. And what I'm talking about specifically is, when you buy a McAfee subscription, you get it. Let's just, typically it's a 1-year subscription, which entitles you to certain features, functionalities within the product. So the one thing that was always on the plan, and it kind of being worked at, was making VPN, virtual private network, available to a paying subscriber for free. So it's part of your entitlement. Why? Because obviously you want to feel safe, not just in your home, but when you're on the go, on public Wi-Fi or unsecure networks. So what we did was, within 6 weeks, we actually expedited, we rolled stuff out, and we made it available to our global user base. So they could actually at least give them an additional sense of protection during these times where people had to work from home, school from home, and just kind of being ahead of the curve a little bit and just looking after them a little bit more.
So that's actually really cool. I didn't even know that you guys you did that. And making a pivot like that, was it hard to make that pivot so quickly? I know there's got to be some pretty good sized silos over there at McAfee. Yeah. Moving like that, one of the biggest issues is just the bureaucracy in such a large organization. What did you do to expedite it, and what did you learn from that experience that you would apply to the next time you've got to do something like that?
Yeah, I can tell you this initiative won the MVP award in the company because it was done in such a, what I would say, in such a just fast and rigorous motion. But it really talks to how people saw the importance, the significance of it. Just having that customer obsessive mindset. It took a lot of weekends, long days for a lot of people across engineering, product, marketing, ops, legal, you name it. It was every major team involved to make it happen. And I mean, it's not just that. I mean, we're a company that's been around for like 30 years. So we've got platforms and technologies that have been working, and obviously doing these changes on systems that have been here for a while, it's not the most fastest turnaround. So yeah, it took a lot of effort from a lot of people. The result was amazing. In terms of learnings, obviously, it's amazing to see how people work together in times of need, such as this one, to deliver for the greater good. But it did help us kind of figure out as well, some of the things that we did to get this thing fast tracked. We've learned some new practices which we can apply in other projects going forward. So it was all in all tiring, rewarding, but also beneficial in terms of internally, how do we get these things done and do them better every time.
I feel like you nailed it right out of the gate, because the best way of motivating a large organization through some major change, some sort of change management, is purpose.
Yes.
There was a unifying purpose. Never waste a good crisis to unify people. Yeah. It seems like you're really passionate about personalization, customer, journey. Like, where did this passion come from, and why are you so passionate about it?
So for me, I am very passionate. So you're spot on. I mean, even from a previous life, in one of our competing companies, I wasn't in the same role. I was actually looking after. I was customer care and technical support. Not that I know technology in that respect, but it's more about the motion of looking after your customers. So I've got a very deep passion for our customers, and what I do in McAfee as well, it's very customer centric, very customer obsessive. why do I care about it, and why is it so important as well here in McAfee? So, McAfee is a subscription business. We offer memberships to security. So, as a subscription business, we care very much about building a relationship with our companies, which essentially and earns us the right to renew them, to upsell, to cross-sell. So it's we don't want to be one of those companies, those gym memberships where you've signed up, you forgot about it, you've never been to the gym, and it keeps going. I mean, we're a subscription business. We have these pitfalls, so we want to be aware of them, and we want to be working towards them. So how do we how do we earn that right to renew you and to upsell and to cross-sell is through you knowing and trusting the company and knowing who you're dealing with. But equally important, and Sachin touched on that before, we are a security provider. So customers look to us to protect what matters to them most. We're thinking of, if you think of the data, their privacy, their identity, their loved ones, everything they do online. So for us, it's super critical that we earn a spot as the trusted security provider. And to that extent, I mean, what we've done very recently is we've orchestrated lifecycle journeys, which are structured to, as you start your life with McAfee, these are structured to educate, to inspire, to empower, to support you at every step of your life cycle. And going back to personalization, what we've done is just the beginning. I mean, personalization will make this more intimate, and it will make it more relevant, and hopefully earn us that trusted security provider status that we're looking for.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought about this earlier, but can't think of anything more important right now during COVID than making sure that I can get on the internet, making sure that my systems and my devices are working well. My son is going to be freshman in college, or freshman in high school. His freshman experience can be totally different. Without being able to go online, there's no way. He can't go to the school. It's got 6,000 students, largest high school in North America, Brooklyn Tech. And the idea of him going to somewhere like that, with that many kids, however many show up, is just something we're not willing to chance at this point. So yeah, I can't think of anything more important than securing our devices and internet access.
Jason, what you just said, it's so accurate. I mean, this is what we're hearing. I mean, we're all, those who are parents, we have the same concerns. People who are, those who have parents, in a more older age. I mean, how do they, because everybody's online. I mean, how do they stay safe online? So it's across the board, and this is one of the things for me with McAfee. It's you get a sense of purpose. We're serving a very noble cause. You go to work and there's millions of people that depend on this company and other companies in our space, just keeping them safe, making sure that whatever they do online, they're being safe. They're being educated as to how to do so.
Let's get into the building blocks of personalization. Talk to me about, what are those building blocks? It doesn't have to be in the order, of building from the beginning to end, but what do you think is important to making great personalization a reality?
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit from our experience as well, because that's kind of the journey that we're going into. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, personalization centers on how well you know your customer. So to get to know your customer, it all starts with data. I mean, data, at least from my perspective, it's the most significant element. It's basically the fuel that feeds personalization, to put it simply. So if you have the data, then the next thing you need to develop, a robust segmentation strategy. So to do that and really to get rich segmentation, you need to incorporate attributes like demographics. If it's an online product, telemetry, attitudinal, psychographics, essentially create a 360 view of the customer. And, with segmentation in place, then you use that to develop your customer personas that we then use for targeting. But again, what's kind of key to all this is, you need to make sure you have the right technology in place. That, technology needs to enable things like, real-time data updates, dynamic content serving, omni-channel messaging, and integration, targeting, because, you want to ensure that you are kind of practicing personalization across all the channels, consistently. And maybe the last stage, which doesn't start as at the last stage, but it kind of starts from the beginning. But the one that you focus on at the end is you need to commit to an ongoing improvement, non-stop improvement. So, put in place an ongoing motion of test and learn. You drive continuous improvements and optimizations, because you don't do it once and you let it go. You need to keep iterating, and you need to remain relevant, and you need to remain intimate with your customers throughout their life cycle.
You talked about personas, data segmentation, 360 view, persona work, and persona work is so important. A lot of people forget how important that is, not just for targeting, which I agree it's important, but messaging, knowing what, focusing on the challenges that actually emit maybe an emotional response from people, like really focusing on what is important to this person, what is the language that we should be using. And the big challenge there is now you've got to get that messaging out across multiple different, devices, multiple different channels.
Yeah.
How the heck are you managing that messaging without doing it all manual?
Yeah, so that is a great point. It's kind of where we're at. How are we? We need to figure that out. I mean, to your point, you got to make sure that your customers feel that personalization love across whatever channel they're on, whatever device they're on. It's got to be consistent, and it's got to be relevant. It's got to be relevant to the device you're on, the time of day, the stuff that's in your mind at that time. So, how do we do that? I think, and I don't think we've cracked it yet. It's something that we're working on. There's obviously a lot of technology out there, and there's a lot of providers that could probably live up to that. So I don't have an answer for it at this point, but it is the big problem we have to solve for, because otherwise, to your point, automation, you need to have automation. You need to be able to serve dynamic content, because otherwise you're back to manual, which is labor intensive, which it's very hard to maintain, let alone scale. So that is one key element to enable all this.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody has figured out all this. So nobody I've ever talked to is tackled. How are they actually dealing with identity? How are they collecting and storing the data? How are they like? There's big holes in, I think, even the greatest organizations that are trying to do personalization. And then on top of that, all the changes with privacy and compliance on top of it. Yeah. Because without one view of the customer across all these platforms, you're going to be treating your very best customers like strangers. And if you can't identify, all right, who is this person on this platform, none of that messaging, none of the targeting is going to do any good. So don't feel bad about not figuring it out, because everybody's trying to figure that out. We talked about the certain data in our prep call. What sort of data are you most interested in learning about consumers? Do you ask it all up front, or are you asking over time to develop that relationship? Talk to me about that.
I think it's a bit of both, because, being a subscription business, I mean, data gathering itself is a journey, just like a subscription is. So, the earlier you are in the life cycle, the fewer data points you have to work with. And, at the outset, just kind of what we would typically have, you've got your basic essentials. You've got geographic data, for example. You've got product info. You've got some billing info, and maybe some demographic data as well. But then over time, as the customers engage more with the product, then we start collecting telemetry. We start collecting behavioral data. They would have probably spoken to support, so we've got some support data, device data, renewal payment data. So all that kind of starts building up, which then allows us to synthesize more elaborate segments, which then goes back to, we become more accurate in how do we anticipate their needs. And then it feeds into the MarTech, how do we email, how do we show up, and how do we target, and so on.
Right. Sachin mentioned, and I thought it was really smart, someone's in a Starbucks, or they're in an airport, and they're not using VPN, and they're just kind of joining the, taking the chance and logging into a public, service. Are you able to message people at that time? Is that just a pop-up? That seems like a really important data piece happening in real time. So reacting in real time Talk to me a little bit about how you're trying to help people mitigate risk as they join or get onto sketchy public networks or do anything like that.
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to this, and obviously the biggest role product. So the product needs to be smart enough, and it is, to warn you, to identify where you are, to show up and say, hey, click here, so that you can at least be more secure on whatever public network you're on. And we are evolving in that respect. I mean, we're doing what we need to be doing, but there's just so much more you can do from the product, to the extent that maybe there is a feature that just switches it on automatically whenever it detects that you're on public network. Some users may want to be able to control that, so you give the user choice. But it needs to be in a way that, again, going back to personalization, it could be a person that just wants to have it switch on automatically. You don't have to worry about it. You're protected. Somebody who's more kind of who wants to control it more, again, they would have the option to switch it on, switch it off, wherever they feel they're risky. But I think the second part to this is the fact that it all depends on education, because VPN is a acronym, but very people can really understand how it can protect them and the risks they have outside. It could be at Starbucks, it could be something as simple as Facebooking or whatever, but you're exposing yourselves to risks, and people just don't get the full scope of what's out there. So I think it's like, just to kind of go back to it, I think a lot of it has to do with the product and that product experience, but equally important is education. How do we get customers to appreciate the risks?
Yeah, I mean, especially bad for the have-nots that are out there and the kids that are actually standing outside of a Dunkin' Donuts trying to log in so they can do actually their homework. It's the people that actually need the support and the safety the most that sometimes can't quite afford it. So it's pretty wonderful that you're making it more affordable, VPN, things like that. But, something that I think a lot of people have to think about. A lot of these kids don't have great online access at home. So, hopefully companies will step up and maybe, help with that. So, one of the things that is important is, how do you know when you're doing it right? How do you know when personalization is working, and even more important, when it's not working? So what are the KPIs that you look at when trying to measure the success of your programs?
Yeah, that's a great point, because, whatever you do, I mean, retention being a journey. I mean, you could be doing stuff early in the journey and you only find out 9, 10, 12 months later when a customer renews. And those are the metrics at the top of the stack. In other words, retention rates, bookings, ASP, the price at which a customer renews, all that is kind of, the top metrics. But below that, we look at a number of, leading and lagging indicators, so which kind of feed into these metrics. So I'll give you an example, which hopefully will demonstrate the point. We are building predictive models that tell us which actions in the product, which actions that a customer can take in the product will lead to high retention. So, for example, if we see that a user adds another device to their security product, they add their security product to another device, to put it more accurately, or they run a specific product utility, and we see it creates more stickiness, and it has a more positive impact on retention downstream. And these are the types of tests that we're doing. So when we're personalizing the journey, we're aiming to positively impact those behaviors, to trigger them, because we know they're going to lead to better retention. So that's kind of the one thing that we look at in terms of those leading indicators of retention. How do we stimulate? How do we trigger them? The other thing is, we measure how users react to our messaging at, key moments of truth, because it helps us understand how, positively or negatively, we're influencing a customer's intention to renew. So, we measure various data points depending on what tests we're running. It could be subscription opt-ins, opt-outs, refunds, the message performance itself, or the product engagement. I mean, all those, like I said, depending on the test, would be significant in us figuring out whether we are being successful or not.
So I'm going to move into some of the questions, because my last panel, I got no questions, but this panel, I'm getting a lot of questions. So I am just going to, I'm going to hit some of these.
Okay.
All right. So in your opinion, how does personalization and mobile marketing function differently, if at all, from how TV advertising does? For example, Taco Bell will run TV spot at night for breakfast. Are mobile triggers more now-based marketing, or are you using them for, like, alerts to think something for people to do something or think about things in the future?
I think mobile is an integral part of personalization because, with personalization, we want to get to the end user, but to the person, not just the end users overall. So, which is what TV does. TV does addresses an audience. The mobile is in your hand. So the more contextual we can be, the more relevant we can be, we will show up on your machine, and we can show up in our app, in the case of McAfee, or we can show up in messaging. So for me, if I look at the two kind of channels, I would look at mobile as being the more relevant one and the one that can have a bigger impact on personalization.
And people do give you, when people actually sign up, are they giving you the opportunity to market to them in email and in mobile? And is that changing over time? Are more people accepting both?
We haven't been active on mobile yet. We're more active on email and in product, but I have to say that mobile is one channel that we are exploring quite actively, because mobile is more immediate. So, for example, and if I hope we have a little bit more time, but in the case of our business, we want to make sure that you are kept safe, you're protected. So if we know, for example, your subscription is about to expire and you haven't renewed, then we would look at mobile, for example, so that we can show up there, it's more immediate, and we can draw your attention. So I look at mobile as serving specific needs to stay closer to customers.
Great. We talked about silos before, and I want to bring that back up because it is so important. It's critical. Like everybody talks about it. It used to be that silos were I think people thought they were necessary. But focusing on what's important to you, to Sachin, I hear him, talking about focusing on end-to-end consumer funnel. I think about consumer journey, and really the only way you can do that well is by breaking down silos within companies. That drives better communication, better data sharing, understanding each other's KPIs, but also continuity and just look and feel and language that each group along the journey is actually using. Please talk to me a little bit about where McAfee is now in terms of silos, and then where you, Sachin, the leaders are trying to move McAfee.
Yeah, it's again another great point, because in all transparency, McAfee is no stranger to silos. I mean, it used to be a lot worse years ago. Now it's a lot better because there's been intentional efforts to kind of break those down. And I have to say, the past couple of years we've made some huge improvements in our Marcom, in the way that resonates with the product, in how we engage with our customers, and how we provide a consistent brand tone. I mean, that being said, there's still a lot of work to be done. And again, together with Sachin and our product teams, I mean, we're working on what we there's a specific project we call the integrated customer journey. So the goal is to optimize the flows, remove friction, remove fatigue, but more importantly, it's to unify that journey such that wherever a customer is, whether you're in an acquisition flow, you're in retention, you're in the app itself, you get to experience McAfee as a brand, and you don't feel that you're bounced around in a set of disjointed experiences. So we're getting there. It's obviously a journey. But the important thing is to get started, to have that end goal, and work towards it. And I think back to your point, Jason, about as we're talking about the changes that are happening in the privacy aspect with the cookie situation, that in itself now creates I would say a barrier or another hurdle that we have to overcome, because that creates silos. So that wouldn't help us much. So we got to figure that one out as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I feel like a lot of times in part of my role in LiveIntent, many of the folks at LiveIntent is actually being kind of a tuck pointer between different divisions of companies, and commonly it's actually the growth and retention teams, like the growth marketing team, the CRM team, understanding how data flows, so that when we're out there doing acquisition, we're using the customer file as a suppression list. Like, why am I going to waste a single impression on somebody who's a customer? Now, if they're 12 months lapsed, well, then it's time to treat them as a stranger again, or time to maybe advertise to them again. When they do become a new customer, then making sure that we've put them on the suppression list, and now only really talk about onboarding this new customer. No advertising. Maybe not even sharing what you share with the most loyal customer that's been with you for 10 years and uses all of your products. But in order to kind of make sure that you're following along that journey and helping them in that next step, everybody's got to communicate. And so, I think that's really going to be key to a lot of people's success.
Absolutely. That is a super critical capability to have.
I mean, where are you today in your journey to personalization? I mean, you've talked about a lot of things, but like just right now, what's the most important, things, and where are you on that journey, and what's right on the horizon?
Yeah. So we started, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the early stages, but we've completed some of the heavy lifting, which is building a foundation for personalization. So just to elaborate a little bit more, so we've taken a staged approach. Stage one was building that foundation. As I mentioned before, we orchestrated a series of lifecycle messaging. They're aimed at interacting with our subscribers, starting to build a relationship with them from day one. From day one that they become a subscriber, how do we show up? How do we kind of handhold through an acquisition into retention? How do we take them through that, through the first year of being a McAfee customer? What we're looking at now is the data segmentation and that predictive modeling, those models that we need to put in place, because we get that done, we move beyond the rudimentary messaging, we start anticipating needs and becoming more relevant. In line with that, again, the next thing we need to work on is the personas. We've got the personas that we use for general marketing, but when we get to personalization, we need to be more laser focused, and it needs to be feeding off these segments that will come through our predictive modeling. Technology is the other area that we're kind of starting to dig into. So we've got we're building the strategy, we're going through the solutions that would work best for us. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. But all in all, what I expect by in 2021, we would operationalize all the elements for personalization across acquisition, retention. So that's the ambition, which then means we go into that continuous cycle of testing and learning and just continuously optimizing the customer experience.
Well, that's great. And it sounds like you're chunking it out and doing one step at a time and not being overwhelmed by all the things that you can't do everything at once. So,
no.
Taking it step by step is really important, and it will be challenging. I mean, this is the year. This next coming 12 months is the as we like to call it, the cookie apocalypse. Probably harder than ever to actually identify people as they hit your site and as they're hitting different channels and screens. So everyone's got their work cut out for them, but it's worth the try, because going into the world, when third-party cookies are going to be gone, and not replace it with something that's actually more stable, would be a huge mistake. Both for advertising and acquisition, but also for retention. Because I think a lot of people, when you think about retention, I think some teams still think of retention as, I've got to send more email, or like email is my one way of actually communicating with people. We always like to say email is no longer about sending email. It's actually about identity and meeting people where they are. And I think that McAfee, let me plug Brand Innovators. If it wasn't for Brand Innovators, I would not have met Sachin about a year ago, and we would not be a partner with McAfee, which we're just launching our first campaign. So thank you to Brand Innovators, and for all other sellers out there. Be patient, but leverage this platform. It really does develop great relationships. But I might as well throw that out there. I think we're running up against time. Let me do a gut check with Jason.
Perfect timing. Right after. That's great. Right after the Brand Innovators plug. No, that's great. I think you and I met Sachin at the same event. I think it was
California.
That was great.
At Nestle.
Yeah, that was great. So, Antony, thank you so much for bringing your passion for this space, which is ever evolving, complex as it is. And Jason, thank you very much for always moderating wonderful discussions. And I'm just excited that we could be able to touch upon these very relevant topics today. So, thank you, both of you.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Take care now.